Hello and welcome to the podcast portion of the infamous Magnetic Weasel at magneticweasel.blogspot.com. I'm going to try something a little different here today. This is the first one in the collection that's not science fiction. It's more contemporary. Experimented with the form a little bit on this one. If you're feeling a little lost or confused, you might want to skip to the end. I'll talk a little bit about why I did things the way I did. Otherwise, strap in. This one's called September. Sometime around when the restless wave of summer crashes into the rocky strait of fall, my heart drops, skips a beat. At that moment I can hear the buzzing of warm laughter leak out of August like a squeezed latex balloon, and I can feel the settling farm dust roads on my shorts, resting into autumnal hibernation. This August would not casually roll over and die at the foot of fall. Instead, early September would explode across the scene in a kaleidoscopic, fished lens, mirrored supernova, and I'd be pulling pieces of it out of my teeth and plucking shards of it out of my cortex for weeks. That night we came in formation, the Holy Trinity, ourselves a triangular arrow piercing through the net of a private affair under the cover of darkness, whiskey in hand and mischief in mind. We were much like the classic Trinity, the one you dare not forsake. Of course I mean wallet, keys, and phone. They are always within reach and awareness. Our egoic holds on the outer realms that covered all bases of what-ifs and just-in-cases. Mick was the keys. He drove the show. He could likely, and often did, veer off and crash into a wreckage of his own carelessness, taking us down with him. Nevertheless, he was our driver. Gavin was the wallet, a reserve of confidence, at once capable of saving himself for the perfect moment or blowing it all on whatever luck would have it. Me, I was the phone. Depending on my mood and service provider, I could channel the deepest truths from far-off nebulas, true astral revelations defying time and space, or spout off the most distorted and meaningless abandoned train yards of thought, derailed for no good reason. Bikes parked along back entrances to unsuspecting destinations, we took off, firing our burning arrow through the darkness and past sleeping neighbors to emerge less than quietly onto a field fit for golf. "What is this place?" Gavin asked with naive tongue. "Why, a carnival of surprises," I lied, knowing the reality was less impressive. To be sure, it was only a carnival at all on special nights like this, when the wind moved at just the right speed and the glow of distant campfires lured in the curious. At each new spot there were only other people. But what people? Great ones, shifty ones, ones that crossed all the lines and defied all attempts at guessing motive. "To think, in our own boring backyard," Mick said after a swig. Immediately we felt the warmth of the fire and conversation. A tall and dark birdman greeted us, and behind his glowing smile was the most reassuring sense of unity that I hadn't realized I was searching for. The temples of Luxor gleamed bright and new, shaking the sand off their skins and summoning old connections to Sirius, warning them of the scope and power of our conversation. Our oversouls delighted with the connections we were witnessing in a place unconfined by time, the hall of mirrors that acted as a prism, splitting the all-one into the infinite, challenging the pieces to pick themselves up and reassemble. We obliged. That moment was brief, and the Trinity forged on, too caught up in the electric chill of the nighttime to spend too much on one part of itself. Wandering away from the fire, a playground was found, lights and curtains draped over wooden structures, which made untold amounts of children happy during the day, and now was given the opportunity to delight the inner children of adolescence. We passed a bed draped with linens, containing a pile of wood nymphs having a cuddle party, being serenaded by a saxophonist dressed as Harry Potter. Opting for disbelief, we made our comfort zone in the fort, shacked up with communal hookah and more conversation. Here were also sprites and wood nymphs. Someone must have been playing with paint grenades or day-glow bombs, since there were more neon streaks distributed across countless heads and faces and clothes than could easily be reckoned with. The playfulness of the group was at once reassuring and disconcerting. These were the neo-pagans, the techno-faeries, the singing and galloping first-row ticket-holding armchair philosophers on the forefront of the apocalypse. It was around then a salesman came into view, not known as such immediately. I was put off by his papers at first, but the whiskey in me said it was a good idea, and Gavin agreed. We were already in another dimension, might as well time travel and get the whole thing over with. Reasonable agreements were had, and 2 smiles hid the tiniest delicacies, spaceships on the tongue, guaranteed to take you anywhere in an hour, but not always the place you wanted to end up. Lucky for us, we had no idea where we wanted to be. Meanwhile, other stowaways snuck aboard. I radioed into several other splinter cells that had been waiting for the order. They looked a bit out of place without the wristbands that proved they were allowed to be there, but it was covered readily under the guise of night and the lack of a caring event staff. A sizable population of misfits now wandered the crowds, acceptable but on thin ice, not having made the same monetary sacrifice as the others to be there. I had volunteered, so I had one of those wristbands. I was supposed to be working the parking lot, but that was before the boredom and the bottle of whiskey and verifiable eons before we met the salesman, the wood sprites, and Harry Potter. I had no idea it would be so interesting, judging from the shift I pulled during the light hours. No, this sneaking back in so close to my abandoned duties was solely to show the rest of the Trinity what it was like, and see if just maybe things were different in the dark. Boy, were they. By now the woods had taken over a motif of glowing oasis, scattered like rainbow diamonds in the pitch blackness. We slowly made our way from the hookah den and had to pass Harry again. This time we struck up conversation. A friendly fellow, a bit too in character, and damn good at that saxophone. An acquaintance of his who looked not unlike the cross-pollination of Lady Gaga and a bridge troll was far too pleased to meet our party. Quite talkative and nice, she introduced us to her friend Tito, a solid log of blown glass with a face in the center of it. More and more curious grew these fellows and their customs. The party dispersed frantically. The night was already riding on a rocket, but the fireworks started again, pushing us into high gear. I tried to collect myself and my crew, but they were even farther away from my mind at this point. Lady Bridge Troll tried to sucker me into a one-on-one conversation, and though I wouldn't mind, this was mission time. Sorry, ma'am, I've got a thing to do. And I zipped and dashed and ducked and weaved through the carnival of misfit toys until finally finding the rest of myself. Once again, Mr. Potter appeared, standing in the midst of an industrial gothic techno-rager, in a building built for DJs to occupy at night, designed to recede into the swamps when daylight struck its broadside. Also inside were some of my splinter cells, previously undiscovered. Rejoicing took place. Dancing took place. The sludge of gothic techno reared its head and jostled the party apart like a quake. As I noticed the crowd, dark and painted like Dia de los Muertos figurines, all charcoal and wood and twisted smiles on the day of their glory, they appeared as spiders, an infestation to my psyche. Simultaneously, the faux security personnel of the DJ prevented Harry Potter from joining in on his silver thundering chariot. This would be a slow and crunching solo show, they said with their actions and not their words, not a group affair catering to the smoothness of a wizard's horn. "Fuck that," Mick yelled, now outside at the top of his lungs and from the bottom of his heart. "Harry's got to play." "What are they thinking?" Gavin asked, half afraid, half excited. "I'm thinking to dismantle the reactor core, topple the electric tower." Of course it wasn't a tower, and there was no reactor core. He meant to cut the circuit breaker. If Harry couldn't play, no one would. However far he had gotten into the whiskey, it was far enough to warrant such a dangerous mission. Into the building he flew like a bird out of a church belfry at exactly 12 p.m. Sunday morning, using the back entrance which connected to a kitchen. At some point he opened a door, confronted by a large beast of a man who only looked at him with certain seriousness in his eyes. Startled and stumbling, Mick flew back out the way he came, arcing wide to come back to us. He hadn't found the power source, but he did make it out with a fire extinguisher. It took all my convincing for him not to spray it wildly into unsuspecting crowds of circus freaks, cross-dressers, furry-booted rave girls, and neon-headed partygoers. Reluctantly he complied. "We have to work on leaving," he said. "I have work at 9. I did not have work, and if not for my compassionate demeanor, I'd have had trouble feeling his plight. It was already 4 a.m. I had all the energy I could handle, but he was ready to sleep. We were in much different boats, but he had the keys after all. We decided to find Gavin, who had been whisked into a frenzy by the Harry cult that just sprung up, following the man through the woods like a minstrel, all members willing to die for that saxophone. Took us a while to decide how to even go about finding them. The compound was huge. However, it would make the most sense to go back to the den and the Dionysian bed in the playground. That's where they would certainly be. There were 2 secret agents, perhaps double-crossers, perhaps undercovers. We couldn't tell. They explained to us that there was a chill room where we could go calm down. Fearing abduction, I immediately put an end to that idea. No. We don't want to go wherever it is you're talking about. Later, guys." Upon walking away, there was a last desperate attempt. "So you guys don't have anything, right?" The implication, so far as I could tell, was anything for sale. No, I called, not to a face in particular, pulling Mick who needed no pulling. What the shit was that about? He laughed. I don't know, I don't care. I am in no condition to deal with that, but I'll fight a son of a bitch if I have to. They weren't following us, which was wonderful. They must not have been too concerned. See, there were volunteers all around. I was one who had defected. I hadn't known who was aware and who was not, and I sensed a bit of trouble brewing. I hadn't earlier met too many people, but there were a few that I certainly should not run into if I could avoid it. But that wasn't it. There was something else. We couldn't tell if we were in danger of being thrown out, which we didn't really care about. But there was something else we just couldn't wrap our heads around. Imminent doom circulated in the air, filled our lungs. Catastrophe was near, and it was unclear whether ignoring it helped or hurt. Approaching the den once again, we found our entire crew, having fled the atrocity and injustice of the ballroom to quietly play once again among the nymphs, enjoying the robed wizard's enchanting music. We're leaving, Mick stated plainly to Gavin. The shock set in. I can't. There's no way. I'm in no position. There was a compromise. We would stay for a few minutes as to not leave in a flurry of clumsy groping hands and unsure footing. Our thoughts in such disarray, there was little hope of collecting them. We'd spend hours bending down and sifting through the sands of time, pulling slivers of our consciousness out of the portal we had entered. Sooner than later, the compromise began feeling one-sided, even though it wasn't. Certainly it was fair to leave. We had a soldier already committing to mere moments of sleep before a full workday. Leaving, however, was difficult. Physically finding the exit was a Herculean task. Well, we came in this way, I said, taking off. I may have been wrong, but sometimes it's better to have confidence than accuracy. We snaked between rows of tents like impassable sand dunes, doing our best to avoid the ropes slung from their sides, put forth, we were sure, more as traps for us than necessities for the campers. In the midst of a clearing of the temporary Hooverville, we saw a magnificent sight, one that kept us from leaving for at least another minute. An elf stood before us with beautifully angular features, arms and legs like thin polished oak sticks and face with the aesthetic patience of a cheetah. She was speaking in an English accent, all the while twirling balls of fire on the ends of sticks, rolling them across her skin, blowing them out, igniting them again, and creating puffs of flame that danced fleetingly across the sky. If we said much, it wouldn't matter. Our gazing alone gushed with admiration, and only our need to leave made us do so. Goodbye, wood nymphs, sprites, Harry Potter. Good night, lady troll, elfish fire breather, industrial mutants of the pre-post-apocalypse. I hope you find what you're looking for. Regrouping took a few more moments as we began down the path. We took a breather and quieted ourselves, suddenly becoming aware of how loud we were. We leave here, I began, and we pierce the veil of continuity. We return from the mythical place and fall out of our time loop, becoming part of the regular world again. We need our game faces and composure. Mick wasn't happy, and I just remembered how he had not come down yet from his earlier belligerence and fanciful talk of demons and suicide, which I was doing my best to ignore. Well, I'm not in a fucking time warp, and I need to get home. Now. All right, we nodded. You have the keys. The path was much longer on the way back and probably filled with more spiders than before. We hesitated for a moment when near a neighboring house, trying not to make as much sound as the quiet 6 a.m. woods wanted us to create. What the hell is this? Mick raged, looking down at a heap of metal and plastic. Our bikes, I sighed, a cold, desperate pneumonia of a sigh. Those can't be the bikes, Gavin gasped. They're all rusted and old, not ours. But they were. Someone had trampled, smashed, bent, and bullied the poor vehicles. We have to leave them. Get them tomorrow. Who would do this? I asked to no one, everyone, the universe itself. The intensity of the energy of the night had built up inside our souls, too much despite all the psychic vampirism that was siphoning off small rivers of our happiness and exploded into the real world, beyond the veil, in the form of a misfortune we had to reconcile. You borrowed that bike from me, Mick said to me with a serious manner. You have to get it back. I tried to muster an excuse and couldn't. He was right. I picked up the bike and immediately the crank arm and pedal fell off. Shit, I cried. I can't ride this. No one can. Give it here, Mick said. His bike was still okay, however bent. He proceeded to ride his bike and use one hand to pilot the other away and down the street. He's on his own now, Gavin said. I hope he can make it, I agreed. We took off down the road, I walking and Gavin walking his own busted-up bike. All the while we wondered, who could have done it? Why? What a strange night. What a strange everything. It's like everything that ever happened is happening right now. And now. Gavin flung his hands out in the most animated way, drawing himself upon the blank pages of my sight as he spoke. The twilight gave the world the most unusual glow and colored properties, unlike any other time of the day. And all in our own backyard, I laughed. It took us forever to get to sleep. Images of the night and not of the night, of our dimension and others nearby, spinning and prancing through our minds. Our speech danced like kaleidoscopes, bending and inventing and changing places with other parts of itself until we must have been communicating telepathically because we were damn sure the words weren't ones we knew. The sun was long up and the night still so close and yet far enough away that it seemed like it happened to other people. We couldn't bear to talk anymore as our throats were sore and our minds much sorer, so gently we drifted off, still trying to figure out what the hell happened. Sometimes there was a rhyme, sometimes reason, sometimes neither. The night had a cadence, a rhythm. Reason? Maybe. There was hope, disappointment, responsibility, lots of effects without a real cause. All we knew was that things were funny, and funny was okay. Funny was interesting. Funny was exciting. All of this in our own backyard. And if nothing else, I still had my keys, my phone, and my wallet. Okay, that was September, written and narrated by your host, Donald Diver. I'm not too sure how I feel about deconstructing the writing process and talking about that, particularly because nobody asked me to. But in efforts to make this more of a podcast, I'd figure I'd include something like that at the end. This one's particularly messy, so it actually might clear up some things if you kind of found yourself lost while you were listening or reading it. I put it at the end here so it could be like choose your own adventure, sort of, if you are all about the death of the author, maybe you don't care about what I have to say about the piece, and that's completely valid. So this is a little extra bonus content. Skip it if you want everything left up to your own imagination. This piece was actually written for a class. It was the first piece that my peers were going to read, and I wanted to make it super bizarre, and I wanted it to read well and feel nice, but in an inexplicable way. Like you get through it and you're like, I have no idea what's going on, but I can't put it down. And that's exactly what some of the comments were about it. And I was really excited to see that feedback from them. My goal was to take a real experience, a psychedelic one, and try to tell it as accurately as possible with using like the most flowery language possible. If you get down to the nitty gritty of what I'm actually saying in each segment, it's all descriptions of something that actually happened, actually transpired. We went to a music festival. I was supposed to work it. It was kind of ridiculous, actually. I was supposed to work 2 shifts. They tried to get me to pay to be there, but I was doing it as a volunteer. Didn't even really want to be there. It was just close, and I figured it could be fun. Not necessarily, my style of event, super hippie, trancy kind of shit that I'm not normally into, but is always fun live. So I had one shift during the day, and they basically told me to watch people set up tents and make sure they weren't openly selling drugs. That was like my only job. And it all seemed kind of lame to me, and I wasn't sure if like maybe it was just because it wasn't night yet. And I ended up abandoning my post for the second shift that night and sneaking a couple of my friends in. And then, the rest of the story, if you read with that in mind, might make sense. When you take all the extraneous language away. The most interesting thing about that to me is the end. There was this feeling of doom the whole night that I don't even know if I got that across, except for a couple parts, but we just felt like something bad was going to happen, and we didn't really talk about it, but maybe it was because, one of us was in a really bad mood, the one who had to work. Shout out to Max and Guy. when we found the bikes all destroyed, it just like completely fucked with us. We couldn't explain it. But there was actually so many potential culprits. The people who ran the festival might have figured out we had been sneaking people in, and they might have gotten pissed and destroyed the bikes. It seemed like cops were watching this thing, so like maybe maybe they did it. Who knows? And neighbors could have been pissed off because I heard it later, they got multiple noise complaints. So, it's a mystery who damaged those bikes, but they did genuinely get fucked up, and it fucked with our minds. So that's it. That's the story. I hope the explanation was fitting and didn't take too much of the allure of the piece away. And if it did that for you, maybe just kind of skip this part next time. All right, thanks for listening.